On Tech News today, Twitter's clamping down on its API, Square's offering monthly fees to merchants, Venmo's joining the Braintree, and Apple's attorneys are not on crack. All that and more next.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Bandwidth for Tech News Today is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Tech News Today for Friday, August 17th, 2012. Tech News Today is brought to you by Ford. Ford invites us tech geeks to join the conversation, submit ideas, and grab a Tech Geek badge at social.ford.com. Welcome to Tech News Today. I'm Sarah Lane.
I'm Iyaz Akhtar.
I'm Darren Kitchen.
And I'm Jason Howell.
We had a long introduction there. I got to do some dancing before we even talked.
Nice.
Yeah, that never happens.
Good Friday episode.
How's it going, everybody? This is the show where we talk about all the last 24 hours since we were last here, stories involving tech. Without further ado, let's start off with the top 10 stories of the day in the news views. Facebook stock hit a record low yesterday, falling below $20 a share on the same day that some early investors were allowed to sell some or all of their stakes. More than 271 million Facebook shares became eligible for sale because of the lockout lift. Facebook declined $1.33 to $19.87 on the NASDAQ stock market 4 p.m. Thursday after hitting a record intraday low of $19.69. The prior closing low of $20.04 was hit August 2nd.
Small business companies, Square wants your business, not Squares. Square just launched a new option for businesses that do $250,000 worth of transactions or lower. Those businesses can pay a flat rate of $275 per month and pay nothing per transaction. Square normally charges a rate of 2.75% per transaction. If a business goes over that $250,000 limit, though, then the first dollar is charged at Square's regular rate.
Twitter announced some API changes, and boy, did it ruffle some feathers. One of the most controversial changes is actually a limit on third-party clients. Get this, third-party apps must now impose a 100,000 user limit on their Twitter client software. Now, apps that are currently in existence will be able to double their current capacity as of yesterday. It's still 140 characters, though.
Braintree, a payments company that supplies technology to process credit card transactions on mobile services, has bought Venmo, a PayPal competitor startup that has let friends send and receive money from each other since 2009. Venmo sold for $26.2 million. It says it processes around $10 million in payments monthly and has seen 30% growth month over month.
Let's check in with the Apple versus Samsung case of awesomeness.
Fine.
Okay. After receiving 75 pages of briefings for people who won't be testifying, Judge Lucy Koh asked if Apple's attorney was, quote, smoking crack. The attorney said he wasn't. The case is almost finished, by the way. Samsung has rested its case after asking for over $400 million in royalties.
Microsoft is now publishing apps to the Windows Phone Store after correcting a bug with digital certificates. The bug affected Windows Phone 7.5 and several apps published fairly recently. Microsoft says the fix will take a day or two to fully deploy.
Lenovo can claim it's the world's second biggest maker of personal computers and now says that new devices running Windows RT software will cost $200 to $300 less than similar products running Windows 8. Microsoft, of course, will release both this October with Windows 8 powered by chips from Intel and AMD and Windows RT powered by ARM-based chips, the dominant chipset in mobile phones.
According to security researchers Pod2G, there's a flaw in all iPhones that allows SMS spoofing. Say that 5 times fast. The reply to number would be spoofed, which would allow the recipient of the SMS to reply to a different number than intended. Pod2G says that the flaw is present in all versions of iOS, including iOS 6 Beta 4.
Oh, is it me? Yesterday it was all about Google Play. See, I'm in yesterday still. Google Play Store gift cards and wish lists getting ready for launch. Today, Google has flipped on the Smart App Updates. Announced at Google I/O back in June, Smart App Updates, when enabled, solve the issue of large apps and slow connections. They send only the incremental differences between the old and new APKs over the series of pipes that we now know as the information superhighway.
Series of tubes.
Yeah.
Yahoo's looking for a new top executive. No, wait a minute now. Marissa Mayer isn't on her way out. All Things D reports that Yahoo's looking for a new chief operating officer after Ross Levinson left. Yahoo wants the new COO to have experience with, get this, making companies turn around. So that's what he's going to have to do. All Things D also reports that Mayer may or may not be on board with this search, as she may be looking to change the entire management structure of Yahoo to look something more like Google.
All right, before we get into some of our meaty discussions of tech on this lovely Friday afternoon, let's take a moment to thank Ford for sponsoring this episode of Tech News Today. Leo and Iyaz, less recently than yesterday, had a phone chat with Ford's lead technologist, one of them actually, Jim Bukowski, about views on technology in vehicles. What did he have to say about that?
He was telling us about how Ford is all about technology. It's not like something they just went into lightly. The apps that are available for Ford vehicles right now are not the end of it. Ford is working on so many cool apps that I still can't tell you about. Every day this goes by, I still can't tell you about it. But they are working on improving their applications and new applications all the time. So, if you like technology, Ford's the way to go.
The thing about Ford that's great is that they're really trying to make their cars futuristic in all ways possible. For example, you're driving along, you're not paying attention, you're certainly not texting, but for whatever reason, you start to veer over into the other lane, and that's dangerous. Wouldn't that be nice to have an app that's like beep beep beep, hey, heads up here. Lane warning, lane centering features using onboard cameras. That's something that Ford is actually working on. Using the cloud to seamlessly connect information and services used in your home, your vehicle, your office. And Ford Social is actually the way that not only can you keep up to date on what Ford is working on, but you can also submit ideas that people at Ford want to read and possibly implement in their future cars. Stuff like wind turbines under the hood to charge a lithium battery, a biodiesel hybrid. That was an idea submitted by a kid, a 15-year-old, smart one too. I love the idea of an automatic sunscreen, right? So you don't have to put up something in your car if you know it's going to be left out at the top of the parking garage all day and then it's going to be so hot later, that kind of stuff. It's really, really interesting collaboration between the people in the Ford community, and you can not only submit ideas, but vote on ideas that you really like. We all know the concept of this. Vote the story up that you like the most. You can read a blog post even that Leo submitted about his discussion with Jim Bukowski right there at social.ford.com. We really thank them so much for sponsoring not only Tech News Today, but shows on the TWiT network for social.ford.com. Thanks to Ford. All right, let's get into a discussion about API. Unfortunately, not over IPAs, because we now do
change our time.
The show in the morning. So Liquid Fridays are just not what they used to be.
We will do mimosas eventually.
We will, yeah.
One of these days.
It just requires a little bit of work off of the top. So there's some 3 major changes to the API as Twitter has laid out in a blog post that went up yesterday evening. The first one, required authentication on every API endpoint. Basically what that means is if your application is currently using the API and you're not using OAuth, you need to update your application before March of 2013.
Well, that one's a no-brainer. I mean, people should be using OAuth anyway, just for security reasons. So yes, this is a good one.
All right. The second one is a new per endpoint rate limiting methodology. So in version 1.1, which is the new version of the API, which is going to roll out in the next few weeks, Twitter will provide per endpoint rate limiting. While an application that only accesses one endpoint may be more restricted, applications that use multiple endpoints will run into rate limiting issues less frequently. Twitter says right now in version 1, in the Twitter API, we limit the number of authenticated request applications to 350 calls per hour. So basically, it depends on how you've built your application.
It sounds great if you had a client that kept timing out and said, hey, look, I want to look at Twitter all the time, assuming you have a client that still works.
But this is just them forcing developers to use the different endpoints to get information, where it's like, do you want to see all of the replies, or do you want to see just these different aspects of the Twitter ecosystem, it makes sense for load balancing. So I'm going to say that one's fine.
The third is changes to the developer rules of the road. And this is where a lot of folks have chimed in saying a lot of this stuff sounds pretty vague. Twitter says this is especially for applications that are traditional Twitter clients, read competitors. So display guidelines now require, if your application already has more than 100,000 individual user tokens, you'll be able to maintain and add new users to your application until you reach 200% of your current user token count as of yesterday.
So wait, if I had 100,000 users yesterday, once I get to 200,000 users, what do I do with my 201,000th user?
You will not be able to add any additional users at that point without Twitter's permission.
Oh, their permission.
So it doesn't mean that you can never have more users, but it means at that point, you're going to have to work with Twitter directly if you're going to grow to a point where you become a threat to them. That's how it's being read by people who are competing with Twitter. Of
Twitter
course.
said they were locking down on clients a long time ago. They said, do not make any more of these. We're going to be making changes. I think this was back in June. So it's not like the developers were unaware of this. And considering what Twitter's done to the clients it's bought, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious they just want you on the mobile version anyway.
So they were saying, hey, you know that service that we built that took off because we were totally open, had these great APIs where you could write all these apps? Yeah, stop writing those.
Yeah, it's like they did, it's like that. It's like the first wife kind of concept. Oh, you did a great job. Thanks, guys. And then they left.
Oh, I see.
So Twitter has said, we're letting you know about this before this is actually rolled out. This is, again, API version 1.1. Once it is rolled out, developers have 6 months to implement the changes. So we're looking at, early 2013. So it's not as if you've got a little bit of like, hey, I've got to, if I'm already using OAuth and I've just got to make maybe a little bit of changes on how my app is written, this might not seem like a huge deal to you. However, there has been quite a bit of response from people who not only make third-party Twitter apps, but are following this sort of thing closely. Paul Haddad of Tapbot, which is the maker of TweetBot, which is the service that I use not only on my Mac, but on my iPhone and my iPad because I prefer it to Twitter's native client, tweeted out yesterday, the sky is not falling. I'd obviously prefer that there wasn't any cap, but the current cap is pretty huge, and we aren't going anywhere. He's talking about rate limiting, obviously. Marco Arment, who makes Instapaper on the token number, again, that 100,000 users and then 200% of that, says Instapaper's liked by friends features timelines and will need more than 100,000 tokens. And that's a relatively minor feature in a small web service run by one guy. So he's pretty much saying, listen, I'm going to have a problem with this. Maybe he can work with Twitter directly, but if he's got a problem, a lot of other people will. And is Twitter now going to have this whole department made to say, okay, Darren Kitchen, you've got this Twitter client. All right, now we're going to have to tell you what you can and cannot do.
Well, it sounds like a lot of people are probably going to get grandfathered in because they have existing users and because the user experience would be just absolutely wretched. But this really sucks if you're a new developer trying to get in with an awesome idea. It's like, oh, cool idea. Good luck garnering a large user base.
If Twitter's going to lock this stuff down, they really need to update their own apps.
Yeah,
because
that's a big complaint.
The third-party stuff was really good, and that's why there was such development, because the Twitter apps themselves were so deficient, and the mobile site was deficient at that time. Mobile site's gotten a lot better, but if they don't put in time and energy to actually unify some of their applications, like the iPad app is not the same as the iOS. The
and they
iPhone
don't
app.
even meet their own display guidelines as laid out in the new rules.
They're just wagging their finger and not paying attention.
Yeah.
Right, the new rules specifying that the Twitter logo as well as the follow button should be next to all of the tweets in the top right corner. Things like retweet, reply, favorite icons should be visible to the user on every single tweet.
Yeah, exactly. So what I think of, okay, so TweetBot, again, that's just the example I use because I use it every day. TweetBot has a great muting filter. I use it constantly to mute people, for a day or forever. That's the sort of thing that changes the behavior of Twitter, because one of the vague laid out rules that Twitter wants going forward is, okay, if you're a third-party developer, we don't want you to alter the way that a timeline would look. It shouldn't look any different than our timeline. Well, if you use a filter, it will. So what does that mean for someone like...
I mean, isn't that the whole point of using a different app, is because you're not satisfied with the way that the, perhaps the look and feel of the OEM, the first-party Twitter app is?
Well, sure, but Twitter going forward, especially as they get into the advertising game more and more, doesn't want a third-party client to be competing with them.
They don't want to dance with the one that brought them. I see how it is.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is, and what happens to something like Flipboard? Flipboard makes Twitter look extremely different. I'm still seeing all of the tweets, but I can, I mean, you know, it's not laid out in the Twitter card sort of way. That's something that we got introduced to last month.
Are they going to impose this, these guidelines to SMSs? Oh, wait, you can't.
Yeah, really. Your SMS
special,
has to be very visual.
Or you have a little graphic that makes the Twitter logo out of like ASCII code, I guess. I don't even know if that's possible.
I like that. Yeah, maybe with some Unicode, like the table flip guy.
Anyway, the API changes are, they also said that I'm paraphrasing, but they reserve the right to add additional features and restrictions in the coming days and months type of a thing, which is, you read all of this and you say, okay, well, this is kind of scary. If you're a third-party Twitter developer at this point, if you're somebody like Tapbots, again, the maker of TweetBot, that's a pretty popular set of clients. I mean, do they just hope that Twitter acquires them at this point? I mean, they've got a big user base, a lot of very, very rabid fans. Do they stop innovating? I mean, their Mac client is still in alpha. It's being actively worked on. I assume it's using a tremendous amount of resources for that team, which I think is pretty small.
I would think these larger developers, like the people behind Flipboard and the people behind that one you were mentioning, they probably will likely have a relationship with Twitter. Twitter's probably going to do some hand-holding as to what exactly they want on those applications and what exemptions they will be allowed. Because it seems like Twitter wants to obviously control its brand and the way it's going to be used from here on in. So the larger ones will probably still have some leeway. And they also have the ability to have the negotiations that the smaller developers may not be able to get very easily.
Right. Then you've got stories like Mike McHugh, who's the CEO of Flipboard, stepping down from Twitter's board earlier this month, I believe it was. Maybe it was the end of last month. So behind the scenes, you have to wonder who's pissed. Who's pissed at each other? It seems like a lot of people are pretty upset, at least at the potential for things to change.
The American English sense of pissed.
Right. And I think if you're considering building a third-party Twitter client at this point, it's probably not a great idea. Yeah, and that's unfortunate, especially if you've got a lot of creative ideas to make it better. Okay. All right, let's move on to mobile payments. Love those. Iyaz, tell me about them.
Now, we know about Square. We hear about Square all the time. And this is really more for the small business user. I said this in the news views, but Square they introduced a new plan. So the regular model for Square is when you get that dongle for free as a business owner, you can just swipe a card for somebody else, and they charge a 2.75% transaction fee. But if you're a small business, that can really start piling up. So they have a new option that they'll only charge $275 per month, a flat rate, if your business has yearly transactions of $250,000 and under. So if you did $250,000 worth of transactions, the flat fee would kind of be equivalent to 1.3% as a charge. So what happens when you go over, I said this before, first dollar is charged at the old rate of 2.75%. This definitely seems like an aggressive move by Square to this point where you can have, I know some people were not exactly thrilled with Square's 2.75% cut because they weren't doing enough business so that it was valuable to them.
Or each transaction was, I mean, if you're a Mama's Cookies, right? And the cookies themselves just aren't that expensive, you're ending up paying a lot in transaction fees and not actually getting a lot of revenue coming in.
And this flat rate just seems like it's going to entice more and more small business users, and that's going to make Square like not a default, but I mean, the more users they get, the more people get used to this idea of like, oh yeah, I can pay by Square. They already have that deal with Starbucks. It seems like you'll start seeing it everywhere else. I think I saw a Lifehacker thing where people are using Square for like garage sales because you can take credit cards. It's like I think this is pushing Square further and further into the minds of everybody if you can use this.
You want to hear from a Square merchant that uses this all the time?
Sure.
Because when I go to DEF CON, DerbyCon, ShmooCon, whatever, and we started vending at Hack5 in the last year, we use Square exclusively at these conferences. And if it were something where I could opt into just paying that $275 for that month, I would love to. Now, $3,300 a year is kind of a lot, and I guess it really depends on like how much volume that you're doing. We're not doing $250,000, obviously, but if you are, you definitely should, because 1.3 is way better than anything you're going to get from any other merchant services company. I recently had this actual issue where I went to the bank and I'm like, hey guys, can you set me up with a merchant service thing? Because PayPal decided to be, D-bags about hacking devices or whatever. And so it's time to get yourself a proper merchant service account. Those things are ridiculously expensive. 2.75% is actually not bad when you consider the fact that everyone gets a cut everywhere. And there are all of these different fees for like, international, if it's an Amex, if it's a diners, if it's like a corporate card, if there's a return fee, if the charge failed. There are just like line item after line items of all these fees. And that's why Square is something that's really enticing, because you're just like, you know what you're getting. That's what it is. And so even if you were doing $500,000 with this setup, it would still be about 2.025%, which is still better than what you're going to get from the merchant services place at your bank. So I think this is a great move on Square's part.
It's nice to have options too. I mean, depending on what you're selling, like I said earlier, if you're moving a lot of volume, but each transaction is not actually, it's not like you're selling a couch, right? Mm-hmm. Then yeah, the flat monthly fee makes a lot more sense, because you end up getting a better rate. If you are somebody like a high-end furniture store, you don't make that many transactions in a month, so you might not necessarily want to do this monthly fee. The per transaction fee would be better. So yeah, I mean, it sounds like Square just opened itself up to a lot of businesses who previously were like, I don't know, that per sale percentage is going to be tough for us, but if they've got a flat monthly fee and they can sell a lot of merchandise, makes sense. It's, independent artists, and I see that too. Everyone's using Square now, but this just gives you another option.
I mean, your alternative is like a week-long process to get things set up with like different payment gateways and banks and stuff. And what they do is they also have like a per transaction fee of like 25%, and then the gateway will have another 10 cents after that. So you've got like these 35-cent fees on top of, maybe you've got a better rate, maybe it's 2.5%, but there's all these things that adds up. I think Square's on it because, it's just honest pricing that just makes sense.
Another thing that makes sense, at least to some people, is the idea of me saying, Darren, you owe me $20 for that dinner.
I do?
Can you just get on your phone and Venmo it to me?
I only got $1.
Well, that's very
Oh,
old
so
school.
Venmo?
Sorry.
Yeah. So Venmo is a startup, very, very much a PayPal competitor as far as me sending a payment to someone or them sending it back to me via mobile means. They've been around since 2009. I actually use Venmo pretty regularly. In fact, I was at a big dinner last night, and my friend picked up my portion because he had a bunch of cash and I didn't. And I said, I'll Venmo you later, and it's fine. What's interesting about Venmo is they've kind of got a social element to it. So if we're all connected to each other on Venmo, Iyaz will then see, as long as he has notifications turned on and I'm allowing him to see them, that I have paid my friend a certain amount for dinner, and I can say something like, for Martin's birthday party. So that there's a little bit of an awareness among my friend group of who's paying who type thing. So there's a social element to it that is unique to Venmo.
Why would you want a social element?
I was about to say, can I like that?
Yeah, right. Doesn't anyone remember Blippi? When we were all supposed to, well,
show
anyway,
our financial transactions,
I'm bringing this
Darren
up because
paid
that's
his
what
laundry.
makes.
I guess it could be like, well, I saw that she already got paid. You can't keep asking for the money over and over again.
Independent verification. I
There we
like
go.
that.
Anyway, sorry.
I bring it up because it does set it apart from something like PayPal, which I can also pay you via PayPal. Venmo has been purchased, like I said, in news views for just over $26 million by a company called Braintree. If you haven't heard of Braintree, their technology is used to process credit card payments. They have over 3,000 e-commerce partners, including Fab.com, Airbnb, Uber, Hotel Tonight, Living Social, the Angry Birds games. So they're behind the scenes in a lot of services you may already be using. Braintree says it plans to integrate Venmo's technology into their own software. So anybody with a Venmo account will be able to pay for items and transactions on the web, via mobile, using their existing Venmo account. Venmo has quite a few users, and I think it's in the 30 million range. And to me, it sounds like Braintree's already got an established technology. They're already making money with their partners, but they don't have that person-to-person mobile payment.
Yeah, Braintree's actually a really slick system. I almost went with them as a payment processor for the hack shop when we were moving off PayPal. And I really like their technology. So this is going to, has the potential for some awesome stuff for the users there. I'm wondering if they bought Venmo with Venmo dollars. Just thinking how meta and cool that would be.
Well, Venmo doesn't actually have its own system of currency.
Oh, it's not like Second
just
Life.
transportation.
It's not like flus or anything. But the CEO of Braintree, this is a great quote about PayPal. PayPal was built 10 years ago for web browsers. It hasn't really updated the way people take payments. Wow, it's that old, huh?
You know, yeah.
Well, it certainly looks
pretty
it,
old.
doesn't it?
Yeah.
PayPal, I don't think it's going to win any awards for unique
design?
and
Well, PayPal
forward-thinking
keeps trying.
design.
You know, they've got the payment by text message that no one uses. They're like keep touting that they will have a Square competitor. They keep showing this photo of their dongle.
The triangular one.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know. That's like saying, well, the fax machine's 100 years old, which it is, and it's still in use. So I don't think, PayPal is going to leave overnight. But it is cool to see that, as we talked about in the previous story with Square, Venmo, Braintree, there's some really cool, innovative stuff going on with just making it easy to give people money. And so that's good for all of us.
This is something, though, this is interesting to me, and why Venmo even comes up is sometimes people have an issue with PayPal, right? We all know someone who's like, I hate PayPal, I won't use it, I refuse. Venmo is another option. Right now, with Square, if you're a merchant, I can pay you easily via Square. But if we're just two people and there's like a dinner and let's split the bill type of thing, there is still not an easy way for me to pay a friend quickly when we've both got Square on our phones. So this is a service that Braintree now has acquired that puts them in a playing field that Square is not in yet. For all of the innovation that Square is doing, it's not there yet. I'm sure they're working on it, but that's not what it does. It's still merchant to consumer.
Yeah. We could always Bitcoin our lunch.
Yeah.
If you'd like.
Don't see any potential issues with that.
Not at all. It's super easy. User-friendly, let me tell you.
Let's move on to the fear that SMS is never safe.
Well, talking about user-friendly, iOS does a great job of just showing you what you need to know. So security researcher Pod2G just revealed in a blog post his findings that indicate a 5-year-old vulnerability exists in iOS text messaging system that would allow spoofed SMS messages to be rendered incorrectly. And so what that means is this exploit, it requires an attacker to have an SMS gateway and the ability to craft what these things are called SMS PDUs. It's the protocol description unit. It's basically the way that, the underlying architecture of an SMS, because there's SMS is being used for messaging, but it can also be used to remotely flash the firmware on your phone and other cool stuff like that. Well, if you're really crafty with this PDU, you can spoof the header, just like you can in an email, and change this reply to bit, where marketers will use this all the time so that they have like a short code, and when you reply, it goes to the right people and things of that nature. Well, the iPhone, since launch, has rendered these SMSs as being received from the reply to header. And this is actually even the case with the current iOS 6 betas are vulnerable. And so it could potentially give an attacker the ability to do like a phishing exploit, make them look like your bank, not like you should be texting your bank, sensitive information anyway. But it's pretty interesting to note that it's using, just using something that's built into the protocol, a insecure by design protocol, mind you, that you could trick the user into thinking you're someone you're not.
That's the weird thing about text messages. People like inherently trust them because like, oh, you have my phone number, so that's a piece of information that I just don't give out that often, which people do all the time.
Well, there's SMS spam though.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
But
If your security relies on the fact that, but I didn't give that information out, whatever that information may be, it's already flawed.
Right. It's like basically though. I mean, it's if you can exploit this and just hit the masses who have iOS devices and do this, it doesn't matter if you get like 1%. That means you get 1%. That's still important. So the idea that this has been sitting around for 5 years, though, I mean, it's still even
especially for people who choose to have SMS alerts turned on for things like, if my flight's going to be late, I have United text me and let me know that there's an issue, so that because I don't really want to get a phone call from an automated robot. I'd rather get that SMS. But what if somebody's like, hey, I'm just going to send Sarah an SMS that looks like it's coming from United, and then I click some sort of a link to get more information, and now I'm screwed.
And how would you know that it came from United?
I wouldn't.
Because there's no identity.
I wouldn't even think otherwise, because I've given United those privileges. So who else would it be? I mean, after reading this article, I know that's not the case, but that it would be the case for a lot of people.
If you got an email from United saying that your flight was delayed, and it said from no reply at united.com, and it had all the pretty logos and all that other stuff, would you not believe it?
I mean, if I was about to fly somewhere, I probably would.
Well,
I mean, it would seems legit.
This is really no different from email. I mean, emails can be spoofed just as simply by changing, I think there actually is an X-reply to, as well as the regular recipient from and sender to and all of those things in the header. All of that is totally spoofable. And the idea that this protocol is somehow secure because, it's this is what I use for more intimate communications, my text messaging. How could it, be vulnerable to this sort of thing? Well, there's no identity, there's no encryption, there's no, a way, at least normally, to prove. In fact, the whole system when it was set up was never really even designed to be doing what it's doing right now. There was never even inter-carrier specifications for messages going from one carrier to another. I mean, they just kind of whipped that together literally with batch files and FTP servers.
So I'm serious. The way around it simply is if you get a text message, go to your browser and type in the URL yourself. Don't go hit view or whatever, that kind of thing. That's what I do with the emails. When I get those, your password has been accessed or whatever happened, I'm like, I'm going to go to the website.
You still don't want to go to some bit.ly link that you don't know where it goes.
Not clicking the websites. I mean, actually going to your browser and typing it in yourself. That's the only way I think you could do that, assuming that the site itself wasn't hacked. But that's I know when I get password reset messages from Google or something, I'm like, I don't think that's true. I'll go to Google that directly. I'm not going to click view or bit.ly or any of that thing.
I just delete all that stuff. It's like if it's not something that I initiated myself, I swear once a week I get you have signed up for Facebook. Click this link.
I think I got hit with a bunch of that back when Sony was hacked last year. So I was getting a ton of Sony stuff. I'm like, did I even sign up for this?
This is something that's part of iOS 6 beta, but can be patched before it's actually officially rolled out.
Sure, but I mean, all it's going to do is render properly who it actually came from and what the reply to is, both of which can be spoofed. So it doesn't actually fix the problem is that iOS shows it as coming from the reply to address and doesn't actually show you both the reply to and the original sender. And I guess that's maybe for convenience and user friendliness and all of those things, but it doesn't change the fact that the underlying protocol is inherently insecure. And while you can do security over top of the protocol, you could go and get an app like Text Secure. This is a fantastic piece of kit coming out of Moxie Marlinspike, but it's still very difficult, and most people aren't going to do it. This is an app that lets you do verified encrypted text messaging, right? So it takes a ton of text messages just to do one message because it's all encrypted, and you have to set it up with your friends and show each other QR codes and validate just like you would with PGP keys, which a lot of people don't use because it's complicated. This just comes down to the same, adage.
It's relying on users to pay more attention to SMSs than most people are.
Or pay more attention to even security, generally speaking, than most people are willing to do.
It's hard to make people do that.
It really is, because it's just not convenient. And so convenience will always trump security.
All right, let's move on to Facebook shares. They're dropping like flies. They're actually not much lower than their previous low, but they did hit an all-time low yesterday. And it happened to be on a day where a lot of early investors were allowed to sell off some or all of their shares previously locked up. These were investors that had bought stakes in Facebook before the IPO May 18th. This is very common practice where you're not allowed to sell right away because they know it's going to spike and then level off. And so yesterday was the day. More than 271 million shares became eligible Thursday, which it's pretty standard that on a day that you're released from a lockup of shares that you would sell them. It's not necessarily because no one believes in the future of Facebook, although there are probably a lot of investors who said, I'm going to get rid of this now because if it goes down to 15, I'm going to be sorry that I didn't, since we're hovering around 20. Any additional shares at this point would add to the 421 million already in circulation. And it was a big day in trading. By 3:30 p.m., more than triple the stock's daily average over the past 30 days. That's according to the Wall Street Journal Market Data Group. So there were a lot of people interested in unloading and buying up Facebook stock. I know folks who have said, if this thing dips below $20, I'm buying, because they believe in the long-time future of Facebook, but short-term, it seems like a pretty good buy. And indeed it did yesterday. Also, according to the Wall Street Journal, CEO, co-founder Mark Zuckerberg admitted that this decline in Facebook stock, which is really something that's just plagued Facebook ever since that botched IPO, is painful to watch. He told some employees during a company-wide meeting earlier this month. both Zuckerberg and other executives had kind of danced around the topic of stock with employees, saying, listen, focus on your work. This is all very short-term stuff. The first year of stock is going to be very volatile. But in recent weeks, have had to address it because this is the sort of thing that, scares employees that are working there.
Yeah, I mean, if you flood the market with a bunch of stock, you're going to have all kinds of effects on the stock price itself. And for Zuckerberg to be in pain, I mean, I would imagine it's because he's achieved so much success, like just constantly, and to see anything that actually says, no, actually, the world does not agree with you right now. Your stock price is tanking. It's not really doing that badly, quite honestly. But the idea that he's, I guess, failing at something as head of the company, I'm sure that's going to be a problem for him.
You guys lost me at steaks. I'm still thinking about ribeyes.
Still thinking about ribeye steaks?
I'm thinking about those Facebook steaks, man.
Zuckerberg can buy fewer. Doesn't that make you
you're right.
sad?
Yeah, he's not going to be able to stock
more
the
for
freezer.
you.
Yeah.
More for you, so that's always good.
Well, it's not a finite. Well, I guess there are a finite amount of steaks, actually.
This is true.
Yeah.
I think there's probably a Facebook fan page about ribeye steaks.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that's not helping.
Their value just a little lower now.
Possibly.
Yeah, this whole thing is. I still feel like this is. There's a lot of to say the sky is falling twice in one show. It's like there are a lot of people who feel that way about Facebook. I'm seeing some of you in chat saying, Facebook, they're not even going to be around in a year. And I don't think that's true at all. And I think that we are still at the beginning stages of Facebook trying to figure out how do we increase advertising revenue smartly without ticking off the many, many millions of users that we already have. And I don't think that they have failed at it. They just haven't figured out the missing puzzle piece quite yet. They're working on it, though.
We're still at the beginning phases of the internet and like humanity figuring out how this social technology fits into our lives.
We just landed on Mars.
Yeah,
Facebook's fine.
Yeah, we'll be all right. In the grand scheme of things, this is a small problem.
The idea that Facebook wouldn't be around in a year is very, very silly to me. I mean, if Yahoo can survive and AOL can survive, I think Facebook's going to do fine. They have
I don't know, man. Where's Prodigy?
Where's Prodigy? Well, does it exist in name anywhere? Maybe.
I don't think so.
But it's also... That's not the same. I mean, AOL, and I'm saying that this is a monstrously large company that has a huge user base that they have consistently ticked off that stay. The user base stays even though there's all kinds of skies falling. This is awful. Privacy's totally gone. People are still there. Over 900 million people. I mean, I don't think it's that kind of like, oh, let's freak out. Stock prices...
Do you think Mark Zuckerberg will stop caring if his steaks get really cheap, though?
I think he'll continue to care since it's his company, and he has to kill his own steaks. Remember, he still hunts his own stuff.
Facebook is so big at this point that the user base is growing. It is not shrinking, it is growing. But then you have these conversations of, well, is growth slowing enough so that now we all have to freak out? I mean, the company is growing. It's not... Yeah, Facebook's not going to be gone in a year.
It's the August journalism. Let's. If you look at stocks minute to minute, you'll go crazy. That's why being a day trader will make your hair turn gray. This is a long-term game, very long-term.
Drive you to drink at lunch. Let's move on to Lenovo. Lenovo's doing just fine.
Yes, they are.
That's good to hear.
They're good. They're on the up and up. We talked about some numbers of theirs yesterday.
Yeah, their revenues are up, profits are up, and this time though. Some information from Lenovo's head of North American operations, David Schmuck. It is Schmuck. He says Windows RT tablets will be $200 to $300 cheaper than Windows 8 tablets. Let's do some math because this number's been floating around. What is a Windows RT tablet going to cost? It was rumored to be $200, and now Lenovo said its Windows 8 tablets will range from $600 to $700. So if all this stuff is true, this is from one source. That would make Windows RT tablets somewhere between $300 and $500 at least from Lenovo. So now that changes, I think, a lot of things for what Windows RT could be at a $300 price point. That isn't absurd. It's like, I mean, $199 sounded like, oh, that's crazy. Who can put out a product like that?
Google.
Well, they're not
Amazon.
making money on those things. But we're talking about a $300 Windows RT. Well, on the hardware.
Okay.
But what do you think of the Windows RT pricing if it is $300 to $500?
Well, I mean, obviously, Lenovo can't, make it up on the Play Store, or the Amazon Store, or whatever have you. So, sure, that makes sense from a hardware standpoint. I still think it's just, confusing to the user because of all of the, brand changes as of late with Windows.
I think it's going to make Microsoft's job a little harder to explain what the difference is. Because if I go into a store and I see a $300 Windows machine that looks the same as a $600 Windows machine, I'm going to go, wait, why would I buy that one?
But you did just a few years ago, and one was called a Celeron, and you didn't buy it.
Well, that's because of me. But I mean, the thing is that the general public is going to be very, very confused when they see this. That tile thing looks cheaper than that tile thing. I'm going to pick that.
Well, when it comes to the inexpensive Windows thing, don't you just think like, wow, this thing is really going to blow?
For tablets, though, I think they've lowered the bar as the pricing and the performance. Because the thing is, power-wise, they kind of suck. But the operating system is so optimized that it doesn't seem to be a bother at all.
Mm-hmm. No, I feel you there.
I'm just watching this tennis match.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you going to buy a Windows RT tablet at $300?
I think if I put myself in the shoes of the average consumer who's looking at one or the other, and the majority of the differences is stuff I can't actually see. Not only is it confusing, everything about Windows becomes more and more confusing. As I was writing the news views this morning, it's just like I hate just even talking about RT versus Windows 8. It's like it's all this, but yeah, I think that no one is going to go for the more expensive model unless the person selling it to them makes a really convincing argument why they need it. I don't mean nobody, but I think a majority of people, if they want a tablet and it's a Windows tablet because they know Windows and they're comfortable with that operating system and it kind of works the way that they expect it to work, then that's just fine.
Well, that could explain the radical departure because it doesn't look like Windows. When you open it, when you start it up, you're like, what is this thing? Oh, it's a tablet interface. How do I get apps? You don't start thinking, will my old apps work when this looks totally different?
I guess that's a good point. So then maybe you end up buying the more expensive model because you feel like it does more because it's got a little bit more of that familiarity.
And otherwise, you'll be like, oh, it's a tablet. I'll just go to the store. I'm sure they have a store. They do. So you go in and
I feel like
apps.
if it comes out and it's like, a Windows RT tablet between $300 and $500, it has to have something really compelling because when I think about the use case of a tablet, what do I really want to do? I want to turn it on. I want it to be instantly on, and I want to open a web browser. Maybe fire up a Twitter client. Yep. Yeah, that's pretty much what I do with a tablet. So why would I pay an extra, $100, $200, $300 for one that just so happens to have a waving flag in the wind?
Waving flags.
Oh.
Because it's familiar.
Thank you.
I know that waving flag. That's the one I want. It does what I want.
Yes. That's the same aspect of so many other companies that are selling to your grandparents.
Well, they
Although
like Windows
Werther's
too.
original, we'll hand it to him. Still pretty good.
All right. We'll find out soon enough. Thank you for the math vague leading numbers, Lenovo. Let's move on to the randomizer.
Randomizer.
So this restaurant called Eva Restaurant in Los Angeles has got a pretty nifty idea if you're one of those people who hates someone else next to you yapping on their phones while you're trying to have a nice quiet meal.
Oh, yeah?
Or even texting. Maybe that bothers you too. Maybe when you and I go out to breakfast, as we do every Saturday morning,
of course,
you've just had enough of me being on path the whole time with Iyaz, or telling him what we're doing.
Or the guy at the booth behind me silently texting his girlfriend.
Very annoying.
So annoying.
Very disruptive.
It's out of sight, but it is not out of mind.
Eva Restaurant is going to offer diners a 5% discount on their final checks for leaving their phone with the receptionist for the entirety of the meal. The new policy is actually went into effect more than a month ago, according to the chef who runs the restaurant. It's a family restaurant with his wife. Yes.
I'm thinking that Hack 5 at the next conference where we vend at, come to our booth. We're going to give you a 5% discount on all the fine Hack 5 gear if you just let us borrow your phone for a little bit, put it in a little box,
You might want to put some
Maybe we'll plug it into a charger.
Well, okay, assuming that they're not actually doing anything nefarious with the phones, the idea is that people just, let's have a meal, but let's pretend that there's no phones. Let's pretend it's the movie theater. You're not supposed to use your phones. And it's actually working. They say 40 to 50% of their customers have opted in and ditched their phones. Now, I have actually been at places where, and it bothers me a little bit, but they will ask nicely for you to do this without giving you any discount on your bill. Just like this is the way that, this is our kind of thing. It's kind of like almost, a coffee place that has a bunch of areas for you to sit and use your laptop, but they don't offer Wi-Fi. It's the idea.
I mean, it makes sense for this place because we're not talking about a diner where you're popping in for lunch on your lunch hour and you're reading, Pulse or whatever your news reader is, and you're having your sandwich. Maybe it's a Reuben with like turkey and like extra sauerkraut. Sorry,
really
I haven't
hungry
had a
this morning.
sandwich in a
You
while.
haven't eaten. You haven't had steaks.
But I mean, it's a different scenario, and it makes sense for this restaurant. I don't know how I feel about like leaving my phone somewhere, but it always drives me crazy though that there's this pricing incentive where I feel like it's like, I don't see it like, oh, you get a 5% discount. I feel like you get a 5% tax if you're, if you happen to
you're a
enjoy
jerk.
reading some, news feeds while you have
But then you
dinner.
won't care. 5% isn't that significant a discount. It's going to change behavior. The idea is like, look, you're sitting with somebody
No,
at a table. Why don't you actually pay attention to the person at the table?
Gosh, you sound like my grandpa.
Okay, no, I will tell
That's
you
why I
that
love my Windows RT.
it does change consumer behavior. There was this restaurant, I don't want to go to anymore. It's a Brazilian steakhouse where they bring you the meats on the swords and you get piles and piles of different meats, and they're all super tasty, but, kind of meat overload, and they're all like, oh, I'll have one of those, one of those, and one of those, and if you don't finish your plate, they charge you extra.
I think that it's interesting to think of, okay, so mobile phones, people equate them with, I don't know, being disrupted, that sort of thing. But yeah, if I've got my iPad, which I could technically use as a phone if I wanted to Skype somebody, but I'm actually using it as a magazine, which is totally acceptable because it's, what if I had the New York Times under my arm? Nobody's going to make me leave the New York Times at the receptionist because
Well, you could game the
what's
system
the problem?
too. You got two phones.
Best point. You win.
Darren, you have two phones, right? You can keep the little flip one available while you give the other one over.
Right, but what I'm saying is like, yes, okay, so if you're playing Angry Birds and the sound is up, that's annoying. If you're on the phone yammering about your, uncle's colon cancer, that's annoying. But if you're just reading the magazine, like you said, and like I talked about, like, just on my lunch hour, maybe I want to just,
I've got it. For 10% off your final bill, you sign a waiver at the receptionist desk
I will not be a D-bag.
saying that you will never audibly use your device.
Yes, no sounds, please.
And
Only
if you
silverware
break
clinking.
the commitment, then you have to pay an extra 20%.
Yeah, keep in mind, everybody, this is just one restaurant. It's not like all restaurants adopted
No.
this thing. It's making it sound like the end of the world. It's like one restaurant decided to do that.
You've seen the signs. There are some restaurants who they'll say, please refrain from using your cell phone at the counter.
No, I don't go
That's
outside.
right.
No, I've seen that.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I assure you they exist.
They exist?
So
Okay.
I think the idea is just, pipe down. Let people eat.
Yeah, everybody shut up.
What's on the calendar?
That's all I can talk. Happy birthday to the CD. That's the compact disc. You know that thing.
How does that work?
Oh,
with
hits
lasers.
and lasers. It's 30 years old. It's older than some people I know.
I remember my first CD player. It was the coolest thing
Wow,
I'd
it is
ever
older
seen.
than me.
My portable CD player actually destroyed my brother's CD because the lid closed on it. I was very, very upset that we were
You remember when everyone believed that if you painted the outside of the CD with a permanent green marker, it would actually improve the quality of CD?
I never
It
did
I
did.
thought that was for copy protection.
That was
Oh,
for
was it copy
It was
protection?
like to bypass this one
And it
really
just
lame
sounds
CD.
better, man.
Yeah, it
It's
sounds
green.
better. The
It was better
digital
balanced.
comes through even clearer when you do that.
And finally on the calendar, Samsung's Black Galaxy S3 is going to launch in October with 64 gigabytes of storage. So if you didn't like the blue one or the white one, you can get it in black.
The black
soon.
one's bigger.
Let's see what's incoming.
Incoming message.
Always a message.
Mike writes, hey, Dynamite Department. Hey, Mike. You guys are forgetting one important thing about the rumored Apple set-top cable box. Such a box would undoubtedly be smaller than existing cable boxes. Have you seen most cable boxes? They're ridiculously big. I used to have a Scientific Atlanta non-DVR cable box attached to a 13-inch 1997 vintage TV in my bedroom. Because there wasn't much space to work with, I had the cable box sitting on top of the TV. It barely fit on there, generally looked ridiculous. Cable boxes with built-in DVRs are even bigger and uglier than that. Also, I've read that cable boxes in general tend to be underpowered to keep costs as low as possible, often making channel changing slow. The sad thing is, most of the cable box I had was empty space. All the functionality could easily fit into something about the size of the current Apple TV. So, if Apple wants to get into the cable set-top box market, I'm all for it. In fact, seems to be a market in need of a major shakeup.
Actually, the channel flipping isn't about the slow. Well, low CPU has something to do with it, but a lot of it's the signaling on digital TV. But that's a different story. But yes, they're huge.
I do remember having moved many cable boxes over the years because they move a lot. You pick it up and it's big, but it does feel like air because most of it, and you can see all the little slats in there, to let the heat out. It's like, why is this so big?
It's for cooling. You remember the original Apple TV? It was really tiny, really thin, but it was a space heater because it was just gigantic. It was just really hot. Wasn't enough space to dissipate the heat. For the current Apple TV, I have not put my hand on it recently, so I don't know how hot it gets. But I would think the space is simple. Just like my receiver's mostly empty space because it gets really hot.
Well, people have figured out ways to, not not let set-top boxes overheat. I mean, my Roku is smaller than my Apple. Which one is smaller? They're about the same size at this
which
point.
one's more expensive? I mean, you got to think of it from a manufacturing standpoint, and it's like if you're trying to make it as cheap as possible, you might be using larger components because you're not trying to cram it into this cute little Roku or Apple TV size, in which case, big-ass cable box.
Right, which is unattractive, and smaller is generally better when you're talking about cluttering up your.
But it doesn't matter if it's unattractive
stand.
because you don't have a choice. You've already committed. Like, I'm going to go with XYZ cable company. Cool, here's your box.
But I think what Mike is saying is that this might drive people to get something like an Apple TV if they can get more of the stuff that they're already paying Comcast for without having the big ass cable box.
Yeah, I'm saying Apple TV with a what is it called? A cable card. There we go.
Yeah, that works so well for TiVo. Next email from Colin. Hey, TNT crew. While not mockbusters, I've spent a number of years making some pretty awful movies, many of which are currently on Netflix. I highly doubt that Netflix is responsible for any hypothetical rise in production. Netflix deals are nice, and it's the kind of video equivalent of a third-run theater. At the low end, nobody's making enough money off of a Netflix sale to justify producing anything. These movies are being made for TV and VOD and are simply being seen a lot on Netflix because other content is disappearing off of the service. So he's not blaming Netflix for the increase in those awful, awful knockoff movies.
Well, thanks for a little insider information from somebody who makes pretty awful movies. That's what he said.
Yeah, no links to your awful movies, though.
What awful
I love an
movies?
awful movie.
Come
Remember
on,
when you
we
would go to
love
the video store and there would be that awful movie next to the real one? There would be like Twister, and then it would be like
Hurricane.
The wind blew really fast.
In a spiral.
Twisting wind.
Iyaz, you mentioned that yesterday. I just do not remember seeing the little knockoff movies next to the other movies.
They had the best,
for all of them,
the best
disaster
art
movies.
On the very similar art, similar styling of the posters on the little VHS box, and you'd go, oh, okay. But the old days with Blockbuster too, because they would have just the uniform look. You would just go by title, and you're like, wait, is that?
Which one is?
Is that because it's like Battle Los Angeles? Oh, that one's Battle of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
I see. Okay, missed the colon for the preposition.
Well, that does it for this Friday edition of Tech News Today. Darren, thanks as always for being part of our Friday team. Tell folks what's new at Hack 5.
Hack 5, we have all sorts of great stuff from both Black Hat and DEF CON, and we've got some fantastic stuff coming up in the coming weeks from Tor Camp, some really cool security research coming out of that as we go into Season 12, and we're also celebrating 7 years of Hack 5.
Hey!
So celebrate with us, Technolist, for 7 years.
That's
Imagine
great.
that.
Look at this, your very own unit of currency.
Yes,
What will this buy me?
that is a techno buck, and and not much.
This is nice.
Thank
well,
you.
it looks good.
Thank
I
you.
actually
I have a new
don't want to
decision
buy
point.
anything
All
with it.
right.
I want to save it for posterity. And thanks to everybody who participated in our subreddit. technewstoday.reddit.com is where you can go to submit stories you want us to talk about, conversation in the show, or to vote stories up and down that others have submitted. It's a lot of fun in there. So thanks to everybody who participates every day, particularly today. All right, that does it for the show. You can write us at TNT@twit.tv. You can leave us a voicemail at 260-TNT Show. We'll be back here on Monday with Tom Merritt. He will be back in the studio with our guest, Father Robert Ballister. We'll see you then. Have a good weekend, everybody.